You are listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. This episode is a highlight clip from this week's full episode. To listen in on the complete conversation, see the show notes for the link to the complete show. You can help us out by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate every bit of your support. I'm Morgan McKittrick, your producer, and this is Decidedly.
This is the idea of touching a hot stove, all right, and immediately you pull your hand away, okay? We don't have to think about pulling our hand away. Our brain immediately says, threat, pull your hand away. It doesn't wait for our logical conscious mind, okay? But in environments of high stress, right, our arousal is going to go up, and automatically as we start to get more stressed and more anxious, our conscious mind is start to go offline. And so what we have to start understanding how to do is bringing our anxiety levels down, bringing that frontal lobe back online, because it's only through our frontal lobe and our conscious mind that we can actually start decision making and processing our environment. We can do that several ways. You can do that. There's visual tools you can use to bring down your stress and anxiety. There's breathing techniques you can do. Once you bring that autonomic arousal back down, you then begin to ask questions about your environment that allow you to start helping step through it. Okay. First question, automatic, is, what about this do I understand? That list might be small, right? It might be like one or two things. Again, what you're doing is you're picking focus points, all right? And then you say, okay, from that list, what do I focus on in this moment? This is how I kind of almost call this adjusting your horizons, right? So in other words, you're picking a focus point that's meaningful to you, and you're moving to that. And then what's happening is, as soon as you hit that, you're generating a reward system in your brain. You get a dopamine reward for that, which allows you to come back and say, okay, what's my next horizon? Let me give you an example from SEAL training. Okay, SEAL training, again, like I said, you run around for hours and hours with boats on your head and on the beaches of Coronado, especially during Hell Week in the middle of the night. I can remember during Hell Week at one point, we're running on the beach with our boats on our head. We've been doing it for hours, right? And I don't know what god-awful time it was. We hadn't slept. And we're running along a sand berm just along the beach. And I remember being miserable, and I said to myself, oh, man, okay, you know what? I'm just going to focus on the end of this berm, getting to the end of the berm. And that's what I did. I just focused, and I got to the end of the berm. What I did without knowing it is I just picked a horizon, all right? And I moved, and as soon as I got to the end of that berm, I was like, oh, cool, okay. And I gave myself, unbeknownst to me, of course, until I studied the neuroscience later on, I gave myself a dopamine reward, which allowed me to pick a new horizon. And I picked a new horizon and moved to that. Those horizons that you pick are entirely up to you in terms of duration and length and what they are. So, for example, some guys will say, well, I just thought about making it to the next meal. Whereas other guys, like, you're freezing in the surf zone, sometimes like, I'm just going to count to 10, right? That's my horizon, right? So, so in any challenging, uncertain environment, in terms of moving through it, it's going to be about understanding your environment to at least a small degree, so you can pick a horizon, you can move to it, you can generate a reward in your brain and your biochemistry. You can come back out and do it again. You start stepping through, and these are micro decisions that you're making as you move through, which are very effective, especially during deep and challenge and stress.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the neuroscience behind it, but I did that during Ironman triathlons. So no matter how fit you are, something's going to go wrong. Either, you get cramps, you get blisters on your feet, it's hot, you're sweating too much, what, they didn't have pretzels at the last aid station. Like, there's always something that's just, there's always something that you go, oh my gosh, I could quit. So I would set little markers, and in the swim, it's hard because you don't have any visual cues. Right. So I would just count stroke, and then I would think of a number, and sometimes it'd be like a fun number, like, oh, how many, what's my address? Okay. So then I'm going to count strokes up to my house number or whatever. Like just so it wasn't just counting 100 strokes and then counting 100 strokes again and then counting 100 strokes again forever. You're like, oh, well, I'm going to count 1,004 strokes. Yeah.
Something that's meaningful
whatever
to you.
It happened to be.
That's right. Well, what you're doing then, what you're doing effectively, what you were doing is you were practicing compartmentalization, because this is what compartmentalization is, and what it means is you're basically, you're chunking your environment, you're setting and picking horizons that you move to, you're creating dopamine rewards when you do it, and that allows you, once you accomplish that goal, to do it again. And this is the way we can practice it.
Man, this is what frustrates me with what my industry does is in the financial planning industry, the entire value proposition is we're going to help you meet your goals. Well, like goals are a tool to get you somewhere that you want to be. Goals are not
bigger than the goal.
Yeah. The goal is not for the sake of having the goal. Like you should have goals, but the goals are for the purpose of compartmentalization, and they can be really small and silly. Yeah. It can be to the tune of, I'm going to count 100 swim strokes.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to make it there. So it could be, I'm going to save, whatever number of this amount of money this year. If that's the only thing you've got going to save, $100,000 this year or whatever it is, you're not going to end up anywhere, and you're not going to stick with it, and you're going to quit. But I'm counting the swim strokes so that I can be an Ironman, so that I can finish this long, hours-long race. I'm setting the goal of saving $100,000 this year so that I can do something else. And it's not so I can buy the house, or so I can start a business, or so I can do that. Because even those things, although they're more complex goals, they have to be attached to something that's more meaningful.
Well, they're too
them.
big. This is kind of you can't eat the whole elephant, right? And the saying at SEAL training, especially during Hell Week, and Hell Week starts on a Sunday, it ends on Friday. The saying is, if you think about Friday on Monday, you will quit. Okay, you're not going to make it through. I didn't even think about Friday until Friday morning, right? Because you always have to take it to bite-sized elements. It's too big. I remember talking to a guy at one of my talks, and he came up. He said, Rich, I was formerly obese. I was just super overweight, and he was a marathon runner, by the way, by that time. And he said, and he became a marathon runner. I said, listen, tell me, how did you do it? What did you do? He said, well, the first thing I did when I made a decision, the first thing I did is I said, okay, I'm going to order a pair of running shoes, right? Step number one, right? Mm-hmm. Running shoes sew up. Oh, cool. Okay. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to put the running shoes by my bed. Gets up, the running shoes are by his bed. The next morning, he said, I put on the running shoes and walked to my front door. That's what he did. Next day, he walked out of his front door to his mailbox. Next day, he walked from the mailbox to the end of the street. Next day, from the end of the street to the end of the neighborhood, whatever. Slowly, over the course of days and weeks, began to slowly start running, then jogging. He ended up being a marathon runner, okay? He started by ordering a pair of running shoes. That was his very first goal, all right? So what you're saying is so true. He said his overall goal was to run the marathon, just like it might be someone to buy the house or get the retirement home or whatever. But you have to chunk it down, because if you don't chunk it down, you're not creating reward systems that'll.
And if you sit there and go marathon every day, especially when you're not in a position to even
you can't even run.
You can't even run a mile. Then it's demotivating. 100%. So that's so fascinating. I think that's another one of the unknown knowns, the things that we know that we're not really sure that we have to know. And as an industry, I think certain people are kind of coming aware and going, oh, you know what? Goals for the sake of goals was not really what the higher purpose of this work was. You said something a second ago that I want to highlight, mostly because it helps me feel better about myself. So did we have this?
Eat a lot of that?
Yeah, I every day. Did we air that guy? Okay. I didn't want to say his name, but we recorded an episode with a guy who came on, and we didn't air it because we didn't think it made any sense. We're like, this, I think he's full of it. One of his big messages was decisiveness is not that good. Oh. And he said, well, we praise people for making quick decisions, but they need to be more thoughtful and need to really take a slow approach, because quick decisions can hurt. And these are all of the ways that being decisive is harmful. And we were kind of looking at each other. We're super decisive. We're very we've taken assessments that say you are the 1% of decisive people.
A lot of efficiency and speed in those decisions.
And that's some of it is our impatience showing, as we're just going to, I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to make a decision and be incorrect, but I'm not going to sit here and just wait forever. So I had to say that because I thought,
well, I have to say, because I would say decisiveness, and again, I would agree with you. I disagree with this guy, because what I think what this guy doesn't realize is everything we do is a decision, right? And sometimes, and this would happen in combat too. Yes. Sometimes the decision is to do nothing. Sometimes the decision is to wait, right, and stop.
That better be a conscious decision,
right?
though.
Yeah, but and again, even again, we're making unconscious decisions all the time too. So we have to recognize those, especially when we're starting to act, without thinking. So this fight or flight thing. We're either freezing or we're either stepping in or freeing or fleeing. The key is also accountability. I mean, you have to buttress every decision with accountability, because if you don't, you're not effectively analyzing the effects of those decisions. Right? You make a decision, you own it. You start running down that pathway, and you say to yourself, okay, how's this working? Oh, it's not working. Okay, I'm going to make another decision, right? I'm going to change. I'm going to do whatever. But everything we do is a decision. Every single thing we do, whether unconscious or conscious. And I think the power in what you all talk about is that the more we can take control consciously of our decision-making process, the more successful, the more powerfully, the more efficiently we act as human beings. And this is how the highest performing teams operate. The highest performing teams, the masters of uncertainty, we've all gotten to a position where in the deepest, most dire, most dangerous circumstances, we manage ourselves, so we're making decisions. Sometimes those decisions are as little as, I'm going to count to 10 right now, but that's still a decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think you're absolutely right. Life is about making decisions. And yeah, of course, sometimes decisions should be made more thoughtfully, but again, that's going to be based on what decision it is and what type of information you're gathering. And the decision might be, we're going to wait for more information on this one. That's the decision. So
yeah, waiting because waiting on accident is harmful. Waiting, well, not right now. Well, I'm not sure. Well, I don't know.
I would almost say, that's not even on accident as much as it's on fear. A lot of times people they delay because they fear making a movement. They fear making the wrong movement. And gosh, I mean, I'm a real believer that sometimes the right pathway is not going to even show up until you move far enough down the pathway to see it. Right? You have to go over that next hill to see what other pathways there are, which means you have to start moving, right? Because you're not going to figure it out unless you do, and you can't do that unless you start making decisions.
How do you keep from, in SEAL work, there's a lot of, I would think, fear. I mean, if somebody's not afraid, they maybe haven't assessed the risk, but there's got to be a lot of uncertainty. There's got to be some anxiety that goes along with that to create that fear. How do you overcome that if you are in an uncertain situation where you're having to make a decision?
Yeah, the first way you do it is because you've built a team that operates with immense proficiency, and we attain mastery of some of our basic things. And the SEAL teams, it was always like shoot, move, and communicate. We master those skills of shooting, moving, communicate to the extent we don't have to think about them, which means that frees up our mind to start dealing with the uncertain environment. And then what we'll do is I think we get really good at doing this unconsciously, is again, the decision-making process is first, number one, it's, okay, I'm going to collect all the information I can or that's available to me. Okay, that's the first thing we do. Whether it's a protracted decision where you're really collecting stuff, or it's a very rapid decision where you're saying, what about this environment do I understand? What information do I have available to me right now in this moment? Okay, based on that information, what's the priority list based on what I want to accomplish in this moment? Boom, boom, boom. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's move on that first priority. All right. This process is basically buying down risk to a certain degree. But the other thing that I think you get very good at is being okay with risk. Okay, we often call it the 80-20 rule, right? We never ever had 100% intelligence on a target. Okay, ever. All right. So our whole thing was, listen, as long as we have a percent, it doesn't even have to be 80%. As long as we have enough of percentage to allow us to decide something, let's just go ahead and move.
Thanks for making the great decision to listen in to this week's episode highlight. If you want more of what you just heard, see the show notes for the full episode. As always, for the latest decision-making tips, find us on decidedlypodcast.com or on Instagram @decidedlypodcast. And be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter from the link in the show notes. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review as well. We read all of your comments, so if you learned some decision-making tips today, let us know. Until next time, this is Decidedly. Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.